Lazarus said. My father said, if everyone went to the monastery, who would occupy our hospitals, who would occupy, the schools, you can still get to God and not have to live a life of recluse. So, Abbas already covered this. Copt is just in Egypt. Egyptus was named after the Egyptian word for Egypt. So they called Egypt the country HIKMA, and Ta was the god, the embellishing kind of god of the time. They pretty much called them after themselves. So many people are familiar with pagan Egypt and probably Muslim Egypt, but everyone forgets what's in between. No one thinks of Egypt as once having been occupied by the Greeks or by the Roman Empire. And at one point, the whole of Egypt was practically Christian. And there's the landmark of the province of Egyptus. So Egypt has undergone many switches of hands. So initially we had the Pharaonics who ruled, and then this great man, Alexander the Great, came and introduced Greek, and suddenly everyone's now speaking Greek in the empire. And then we have, once he died, we have one of his generals, Ptolemy, who he was a bit of a kind of a weirdo, He accepted the title of pharaoh, but he still had these Hellenistic influences. He was very syncretistic with his religious practices, so he combined Egyptian gods and Greek gods and created a cult called Serapis. Then we had the Roman Empire, and that's I think Augustus, and Persian, Arabs, even Britain. To this day, it's switched a lot of hands. And so Hellenism was a big part of Egyptian lifestyle. As you can see from the clothing, that was what Greeks wore, and that's an Egyptian essentially. So what about the language? So initially they had this archaic language which evolved into Coptic. So Coptic is also a language. It started off with the hieroglyphs, which was mainly for religious purposes. That's why you only see it on temples, you don't see it in everyday life. That then became more cursive, running writing. And then eventually it got down to the people, and it was called Demotic, like from democracy, it's the people's kind of language. And then it actually evolved to Coptic, and the reason for that is because, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because people would buy amulets, and it was written in this archaic language, and nobody could recite it. And if you couldn't recite the amulet, you couldn't be protected from the curse or whatever, because everyone was speaking Greek at this time. Everyone was reading Greek at the time. So what literally they did is they got the Greek alphabet and the Egyptian language and literally put the two together. So I'll give you an example of this. So this is a prayer, which is, as you can see, the writing is almost like Greek, Greek letters, like you have the theta and the pies and all that stuff. But if you consider transliteration, it's nothing we understand. So it actually goes like this. Thoktetikon, Nempi O, Nempis Monempia, Mai Shania, Emmanuel Noti Finoro, Thoktetikon, Impashoisis, or some Bethostos, Pasotirados, Tagon, Nempasmo, Pepshois, and Shopinex, or today, Thoktetikon. So it's a language that you've never heard, which is only liturgical at this point. It is a dead language. And there's reasons for that. I would say the main reasons is because when other empires came, to get a job, you needed to learn how to speak Persian or Arabic. And you hear these like, they forced people not to speak, this particular language. And yeah, okay, for a little bit of a period of time, you did have some aggressive people who were like that. But it's just redundancy. Even me, I'm losing my Arabic language because I'm not using it anymore. I'm in Australia now. And that's what happened. So how did Egypt become the cradle of Christianity? So firstly, we'll start with the person himself. So from the historical point of view, we have a man called Yeshua ben Yosef, so he was the son of Joseph. Okay. Modern scholarship dates his birth to about, as far as I've seen, 8 BC, but anywhere from 2 AD to 7 BC. And he was in a place called Judea, which is this place here, which is in modern-day Palestine. Okay. Now, the languages he spoke, I heard a lot of you guys talking about it, and it is true, he did speak Aramaic. That was the common language at the time. which was required when you would read the Torah, the scrolls of Torah, which you can see him pictured here. And he would also have spoken Greek, because we know in many of his encounters with Greeks and the Syro-Phoenicians, he was actually able to speak without an interpreter, so he would have probably been literate in Greek as well. So just like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he had sahabas, he had disciples. So he had 12 disciples called Talmudim, which means pupils. And they're all, as you can see, they all have Jewish names, like Shimon, which is Peter, the apostle, Yaakov, James, Levi, Matthias, John, Yohanan. Okay? And then you had his outer group, but it was still his following, called the apostles. Now, when we think of apostles, we think, the Prophet Muhammad, but apostle just means sent one. So these are people that were sent to kind of minister to the people at the time. We have Lucas, the physician, Rabbi Shaul, that is what modern people call Paul. So in those days they had two names, they had a Jewish name and they had a Greek name. And Shaul was his Hebrew name, but Paulos or Saulos was his Greek name, and it means little because he was a small man. And Yohanan, and that's Mark, who I'll be talking about. So before Jesus died, he sent a great commission. He said, "You shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and even to the ends of the earth. Go and therefore make disciples of the nations." Okay? So in other words, he's saying, okay, start in Palestine, okay, you can preach here, and then you can go to the ends of the world and you can preach there. So when a lot of people think about Christianity, this is what comes to mind. I put in that they think it's pagan, Gentile, Roman, etc., all these things. What people don't know is first century Christianity was actually Judaism. Okay? And we know this because they referred to Jesus as rabbi. Even Paul, after his conversion, he didn't convert to anything. He just remained a Jew. He went to the custom, he went to the synagogue service. Jesus' parents went to the feast of Passover. And this is Paul speaking. He goes, "I am also circumcised on the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the law of Pharisee." So in other words, he was almost boasting. He was saying, "Look at me, he was saying this for a reason, but it's almost similar to someone saying, "Look, I'm from the Ahlul Bayt, I'm from the tribe of Quraysh, I'm the pure kind of stock." Okay? And he even talks about his former conduct in Judaism. Okay? So much so that about 20 years after Jesus died, okay, from the Christian point of view, in 50 AD, there was a bit of a disturbance in Rome, and because there was Jews at the time living in Rome, and there were both Jews that followed the Messiah and Jews that did not follow the Messiah, but they're all Jews, okay? And they're all arguing over, we see in this quote, it says, "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus," which is Christ, "he, the Emperor Claudius, expelled them from Rome." So essentially what happened was that there was a disturbance over Jesus. Is he the Messiah? Is he not? Between Jews. And this Roman Emperor got so fed up, he's like, "That's it. Every single Jew, leave Rome." And both the Christians and the Jews leave. So at that time, they didn't see themselves as, "Oh, I'm a Christian and I'm a Jew." They were both Jews, one that followed the Messiah, one that didn't. And so much so that they were indistinguishable to the Roman society as to, the issues. Now, Christianity is not a new religion. Jesus did not come to create a new religion. He was coming, as he even says, "I came for the lost sheep of Israel." Initially, he was called the Way and the Nazarenes, and almost all of his followers were Jews. Although he did have some exceptions. It was only until much, much later that when the Great Commission happened and everyone went to the world to preach, that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, actually overwhelmed the amount of Jews. And that's what we see today. We see mainly Christians who are non-Jews. But it wasn't like that in the first century. This is the point at which Christianity and Judaism went their separate ways. So in 70 AD, the Romans came and they destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem. Now what happened was, a bit of background, Jesus gave a prophecy to his followers. He said, "You see this temple here? This temple will be destroyed. And when you see the army surrounding Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. So what happened was, in 70, around in the Jewish revolt, okay, so the Jews wanted to revolt against their Roman overlords. The Jewish Christians, or the Messianic Jews, they're the ones who said, oh, remember what Jesus said? Well, let's flee to the mountains. So they're the ones that fled. The Jews, who obviously didn't follow Jesus, they stayed to fight because they wanted to defeat the Romans. And essentially what happened was Judaism thought that the other Jews that deserted them were no longer Jews, and then that's when they formally became two religions. Now I'm going to be talking about Jesus from a historical point of view. So what does history tell us? We have a historian named Flavius Josephus, who was writing at the time. He said, about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if one could call him that. He won over many Jews and many Greeks, and he goes on to say some other things. We also have Tacitus, the Roman historian, who talks about, who even mentions the problems in Rome. He goes again, broke out not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but in Rome as well. And he's also talking about Christus, okay, at the hands of Pontius Pilate, who was the person who sent him to death. So now we have a problem, okay? We have the religion, Judaism, and we want to preach to non-Jews. So how do we get them to, follow Judaism? Now there was two thoughts. One is we make them Jews, and then that's the way they can follow Jesus. And that's what happened at the time. People went around forcing people to be circumcised, forcing people to obey the 613 mitzvah, the commandments. And they said, you can't follow Jesus until you are circumcised. And these were grown men. These were Greeks, these were Gentiles, Coptics, And so that was a bit of a problem, okay? So what happened was Paul and Peter, so Shaul and Shimon, they said, there's a lot of background to this in terms of visions and things like that, kind of God kind of guiding them to what they should do. But in other words, they agreed that they shouldn't force people to adopt the kind of external rituals of Judaism at the expense of knowing, of worshipping God in spirit and in truth. So he says to Peter, because Peter at that time was kind of, we should make them Jews and stuff. He said, if you being a Jew live in the manner of Gentiles and not as Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? We who are Jews by nature are not sinners of the Gentiles. Okay? So essentially, the way I can best describe this is America and Britain. Okay? So America has laws which are similar to Britain's laws, but not all of Britain's laws are in America's laws and vice versa. Some laws are stricter in Britain, some are looser in Britain compared to America. So essentially, what happened was the early Christian community, or the Jewish Christian community, formed a council, and they said, what are we going to do? What's the verdict on this? Okay, and this happened in 50 AD. And then their decision was, look, Jews can keep to their law, and Gentiles only have to follow basic laws as a beginning if they want to come to Christ, but it's not necessary for them to become circumcised or to, for instance, not eat pork to come to the faith. And this is why we see today most Christians, for instance, eat pork, or most Christians aren't circumcised. Okay, it's because at that time it was believed that the Gentiles shouldn't be made to follow the external kind of parts about Judaism whilst neglecting the real kind of essence of Judaism. Okay, so in our minds we think Judaism is just about circumcision and not eating pork and all this stuff. But what they were saying was that it should be about worshipping God in truth, in knowing that in worshipping God. But he said, however, they should abstain from meat sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from that which is strangled, and from fornication. And these are the Noahide principles. So you might be thinking, well, how can they have to abstain from food involving blood, but not, say, pork. And I think this has to do with the difference between what is forbidden and what makes you unclean. So in the Old Testament, it was straight out forbidden that you can't eat meat from blood. Okay? Whereas with the pork and all this stuff, if you ate a pork, that was unclean. You became unclean because essentially a pork, it eats anything. It eats feces. It eats cancers of other pigs. It doesn't have sweat glands to excrete toxins. It's very bad for your health. So it made you unclean. Okay. So anyway, so then when Christianity came, essentially the doctrine was there's no more Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There's no more distinguishment between male or female. You're all one in Christ. Okay. And this is saying is that there's no more barriers to getting into religion, whether you're male or female, whether you're Jew or Greek, whether you're free or slave. This is for everyone. Okay. So now I'll talk about Saint Mark the Apostle. Okay. So this man was born in Libya, and he was born of Jewish parents. He was a Jew. He was very close with Peter. Okay. Both of them went on missionary trips together. They were related actually. Now, Saint Mark was a very smart man. He studied law and classics. He was very well versed in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. And he was one of the 70 Sahabas of Jesus. Okay. In 68 AD, he was martyred. Remember the cult I was talking to you about before, Serapis? They were essentially pagans. They hated that he, introduced this religion into Egypt, and essentially they dragged him by the hands and by the head onto a horse and by human beings until his flesh is literally torn into pieces. And we have a relic of his at our church, St. Mark's. But let's go before when he was alive. So St. Mark visits Alexandria for the first time in around 48 to 49 to 50 AD. Okay? And he spreads the gospel to the Jews in Alexandria. Notice he goes to the Jews first. Alright? The Great Commission, the command was first start in Judea and Samaria, then to the whole world. In other words, start with the Jews first, then you can tell other people about it. And what's astounding is that actually most of the Jews in Alexandria believed. Most of the Jews in Alexandria actually believed. Notice they didn't convert, they still were Jews, but they believed in the Messiah. And this includes his divinity and his Trinity. And this is something which I think perplexes us all. I mean, we think about Jews, who are very keen on, not believing in a man being God, or not believing in, a Trinity. But we don't see that in the first century. And I'll explain the reasons why afterwards. But just note that, because it will be very important in our discussion. And, he goes to other places as well. Then after he returns from Rome and all of these other places, he comes back again to Alexandria, just to kind of complete the second part of his mission, which was to not convert, but to give the message to the non-Jews at the time. So he was walking along, and his sandal suddenly snaps apart. And nowadays, we would just get a new shoe. You have a Nike, get a new one. Okay? Why bother getting, why bother going to somebody to fix it? But in those days, you went to a cobbler, and what he would do is actually fix up your shoe. And St. Mark was walking along, and it's like, how am I going to tell these, people in Egypt about God? These guys are the most notorious in, idol worship or whatever. And he gave his shoe to the guy who was working on it, and the guy accidentally cut himself, and he said, "Oh, one God." In the Coptic, he said, "Oh, Theos." Alright? And Mark was strange. He's like, how did this guy, who is idol, whatever, worshiper, in a pejorative sense, he didn't say that. How did this, it was instinctive that he said, oh, one God. And so he said to him, "Do you want to know about the one God?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." And then, and by the way, he healed him, okay, according to the text. And he told him everything, and Ananias and all his family were baptized and converted, okay? And suddenly we see Christianity spreads like wildfire through Egypt. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, a lot of people, like Muhammad, what distinguished him is that he was essentially the one who destroyed idol worship in Arabia. He was the one who absolutely got rid of it. That's what he's known for, amongst other things.
He was the policing atheist.
Yeah. The second person we should actually honour is Saint Mark the Apostle, because he actually destroyed the idolatry of Egypt that had been existing for almost 2,000 years. Okay? So much so that the people would start fasting, 3, 4, 5 days at a time. Now, I have to be critical, and I have to be objective here. We have to ask, why did Christianity spread so far? In my opinion, there was a vacuum of poverty. There was economic conditions. Okay? When he did come and bring this concept that you are no longer slaves or whatever, not that you can no longer have slaves, but that class doesn't really matter, people like that. People like that. Also, just being objective, the Egyptian religion at the time did have similar concepts, okay? In terms of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. But once again, this is not the same as the Trinity, because that was a tritheism amongst the pantheon of gods, whereas the Trinity that I will be speaking about is unique. And I said, is this a fair criticism? Because we also see in Rome, Christianity spreading like wildfire. We also see throughout Turkey and all of these regions, Christianity spreading like wildfire. So it's not just that Egypt had a similar religion to what the Christians were, the Christian Jews were telling. Now, I will go now a little bit into the Trinity, and in the Hebrew texts, a lot of Jews currently, they say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord our God is one." That is something we hear a lot. In Hebrew, this is Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Now, I don't want to go into too much details because I know you guys are getting sleepy, but what I can say is that we see that in particular words like Echad, that is a term used for a plural unity. Okay? The singular unity form would be Yachid. Also, when he calls himself as Yahweh Elohim, Elohim can be plural or singular depending on the context. Okay? And we see in the book called the Zohar, which is the Kabbalah book, we see even in the Zohar, there's a concept of a possibility of being a plural unity. So, so then there was a major kind of discussion about in the Torah how it says, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness," and we see two prominent Jews, at the time contemplating what that means. So a lot of us think today that Jews are, they were very strict in their singular unity of God, okay? But it wasn't like that in the past. Ancient Jews said, well, why is God referring to himself in a plural sense? Why is he saying, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness"? Was he speaking to angels? Was he just speaking as in terms of a royal majesty? Like, who was he speaking to? And Rashi, a famous Jewish commentator, said that he was not speaking with angels, but he spoke with himself. Okay? However, Maimonides, who's also a prominent Jewish commentator, said no, God is talking to angels, and he was just being humble, and he's consulting divine counsel. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, it's not so clear-cut. Anyway, we'll go back to the legacy of Saint Mark. So Saint Mark ordained Ananias as a bishop, so kind of like his successor, okay? And he wrote essentially all the oral tradition, the teachings, everything specific to Alexandria. He was also involved in science, but establishing a school of science, medicine, and all of this kind of stuff. So this is how apostolic succession works. Okay, in Islam you have some sects that say the Prophet ﷺ ordained Ali before his death, and he said some words to him, and that was his succession. Other people said, no, it doesn't matter, it's about democracy, it was about who was closest to him, and in that case, okay, alright, Abu Bakr. With Christianity, okay, what Jesus did was he actually put his hands on 12 apostles, okay, and he essentially gave authority to all of them before he died, all of them. And also the 70 as well, so he had 70 plus 12. So then what happens is you get, now Saint Mark, who had that authority from Jesus, then he transmits it to Ananias, the cobbler, okay? And then that has happened in every generation until today, and that's called apostolic succession. And this is the 118th successor of the See of Alexandria, Pope Theology. Do you guys know him?
Yeah.
Belinda, do you know him? Okay. He's essentially the Orthodox Pope, which nobody knows about. Everyone just thinks about Pope Francis, but there are other popes. Yeah, it's in Alexandria.
Egypt.
Egypt. Okay. Okay. Now I'll go through the Gospels because I know Belinda asked me some questions and she was a bit confused about kind of where the Gospels kind of came, so I'll clear that up. Really quickly, the whole point of the Gospels was not the same way as the Quran was written. So with the Quran, you had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling Muhammad to recite certain things. With Christianity, Jesus never told his disciples to recite anything. He never told them to write anything. He was merely teaching them by oral tradition. They then went and told other people by oral tradition. Okay? Why did they write the Gospel? Because people wanted a copy of it as a reference point. And how do we know this? It was the Gospel of Mark, the earliest manuscript we have, is dated to 66 AD. That's 30 years after Jesus' death. And we see that the church had already existed by then. The Coptic church was established at maximum in 61 AD. So the point of this slide is to show that the oral tradition preceded the scriptural tradition. Okay? And we see the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verse 1. What does he say? I have taken the time to compile a narrative. It seemed good to me, having followed things closely for some time, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things which you have been told. In other words, he's writing it as a summary to his friend Theophilus. The Gospel of Luke wasn't intended to be used as the final word. He's writing it to his friend Theophilus just to kind of consolidate what had been happening. Same thing with John, the Gospel of John. We see that it was written 100 AD, 70 years after Jesus' death. Why? Because there was a specific heresy at that time called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism said, look, Jesus wasn't a human being, he was just a spirit. He looks like a spirit. He looks like a human, but he's actually a spirit. So what does he do? Chapter 1 goes, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In other words, he's not trying to give some lofty concept of God. It's not supposed to be exhaustive. A lot of Christians go to the scriptures and they say, this is the final word of everything. But no, he was writing it for a specific purpose, to combat these heresies. And look what he says here. There are other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose even the world itself would not contain the books that were written. So he's admitting that you can't write every single thing Jesus did and said. You can't. Then we see Paul, okay? Pauline scholarship, and Paul actually makes up almost 50 to 60% of the New Testament. What does he write? He's writing to existing churches to clarify things. He's not writing theological debates or theological doctrine. Look at the first thing of Galatia. And to all my brethren which are unto the churches of Galatia, grace and peace to you from our Lord Jesus Christ, etc. And this is written in 49 AD, which means that churches had already existed before. He was writing to see how they were going. Okay. So, okay, now a lot of questions, okay, and that's why we see divergence in accounts, because they're eyewitness accounts, they're not recitals. So, a lot of people say, Gospels can't be true because there's so much versions of them, okay, but it's not the same. You're comparing the Quran where you expect to have one copy, right, which is a recitation. With Christianity, these are eyewitness accounts that were done in recollection, many years later. Now, are the Gospels reliable? Okay, there's a famous textual scholar called Bart Ehrman, who's an agnostic. He has 5 criteria: the number of manuscript copies, the number of external citations, the archaeological and geographical evidence, the internal consistency of events, and the criterion of embarrassment. Okay? Now, even this man who is an agnostic, who denies the truth, denies whatever's in the gospel, acknowledges that the New Testament is one of the most historically reliable texts we have on this currently in terms of scholarship. We can see here, Homer's Iliad has 643 copies, which is quite impressive actually. We have Tacitus's Annals written 20 copies. We also see the time gap between when it was written and when the date happened. So with the New Testament, we see 5,366 manuscripts, and the time frame within that is quite fresh. And we have complete manuscripts of these texts. Another textual scholar, Bruce Metzger, said that we have so much citations, which is 1 million in early church literature, that even if the scriptures were destroyed, we could completely reconstruct it even without, okay? Because it's been quoted that much times. Okay, so now the Quranic view of, firstly, Isa alayhi salam. So the Quranic account of Jesus is essentially that on his way to the crucifixion, Allah wanted to spare Jesus from dying. Okay, so what he did was that he transposed another person, Jesus' face on another person. Some say Judas, some say another one of his disciples, so that it makes it appear to look like that it's actually Judas that it's Jesus about to die. And so then that person is then crucified, and then Jesus is taken up to heaven. Okay? And this is absolutely fine. Okay? Why do I say this? Because whether it was Jesus actually on the cross, or whether it was someone that looks like Jesus, at the end of the day, from the disciples' point of view, it was still Jesus. It's kind of like the balagha. We say, is it Ali or isn't it Ali? It doesn't matter. It's still an Ali. Okay? Yeah. So this actually shows that the Quran and the Gospels, okay, not that I'm trying to secularize things and make them similar, which is sort of what Muhammad's point was. What I'm trying to show is that the Gospels did not get it wrong, because even with the Quranic view, they thought it was Jesus, because the whole point of it was to deceive so that nobody knew it was Jesus. So when we see the crucifixion accounts of Jesus in the Gospels, this is actually accurate, because it means that they themselves were deceived. Because if they truly saw Jesus' face, they're going to see it's Jesus and they're going to write about it, you see. Okay. The Quran's view is actually that the Gospels are not corrupt. This is a common thing that I hear in Islamic polemics, that the Gospel has been corrupted and it's been changed, and they've added these things and they've added these things. But forget all the historical stuff. The Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, didn't think that the Gospels were corrupt. In fact, he says, and I will write down my mercy and to those who believe my signs, whom they will find written in the Torah and the Gospel that is with them. Which means even at the time, 600 AD, that he was acknowledging that the truth of the revelation of God, okay, is with them at this point in time. And this is way past the councils of Nicaea and all of this stuff, which people say, they develop their Christological arguments. Jews come up to the Prophet and and say, do you not allege that you follow the religion of Abraham and believe in the Torah, which we have, and testify that it is the truth? And he, Muhammad, peace be upon him, replied, certainly. In other words, they're saying that the Torah that you have now, is this from the Word of God? He goes, yes, certainly. Hasn't been changed. And the other thing is that he goes, people of the book, our apostle has come to reveal much of what has been hidden in your scriptures. He's not saying that what has been changed. He's saying it's hidden and I'm here now to make that manifest. You know what I'm saying? In the early kind of post kind of Abbasid period, we never see any Muslim polemicist accusing Christians of altering the text, but rather misinterpreting. Okay, so that's fair enough. Okay, you guys have interpreted it, but nobody says that they have changed it or mistranslated it in terms of the Greek. A lot of people say, well, the Gospels are supposed to be written in Arabic. That's the original Gospels. But what we need to understand is that the early apostles were Greek. They spoke fluent Greek. They were in a Roman Empire that spoke Greek. They spoke Jewish, they spoke Aramaic, but they also spoke Greek. Paul himself was a Roman citizen. Okay, so the original manuscripts will be in Greek. They're not going to be in Arabic. Arabia wasn't a main language in first century Judea. It only came much later on. Okay. Okay, so what about the responses of the Quran in terms of the Trinity? So we see a lot of verses in the Quran which forbid the Trinity, okay? So the first one is, take me and my mother as, he says to Isa alayhi salam, have you taken me and my mother as deities besides Allah? Now what I will say on this point is that Christianity doesn't acknowledge that the mother Miriam is part of the Trinity. So in my opinion, I believe that this Quranic view was banning specific forms of Trinity that had existed at the time, who made the mother and Jesus and God, three. Okay, and this is called the heresy of Collyroydism. Okay. The second thing is they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most gracious, has begotten a son. Okay? Indeed, you have put something so monstrous. As I'll explain in the next verse, Jesus is described from the Christian point of view as monogenes. Okay? Sometimes this is translated as only begotten, but it is better translated as having no peer and unique. And you can understand that this term was applied to people who had only one son because they had no kids, they had no siblings. Okay? The Christian point of view is that he was never created, he had existed. He's like the version of Shia Islam that believes that kind of Ali was a being of light, but even he was created as a being of light. But that opinion is that he was always eternal, being the Logos of God, being the Word of God, which I will talk in another talk more in detail. The concept of being sent is proceeding from eternal to eternal. The terms Father and Son are just terms of endearment, relationship of obedience, representation, and authority. So at that time, and this is a meaning which goes over our head in modern times, but when we think of a father and a son, we just think of biology. We just think that's the son. But at that time, the son was the successor. The son was the image of the father. The son was the father's pride. So when Christians talk about father and son, we are not talking about begetting or all these things. And so this is a thing that I'll talk about more, which is Arianism, which believes that Jesus was created. Then there's another verse which says, God is the Messiah, son of Mary, have you defied God. So Christians do not believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became a human. That's not what they believe. They believe that his word became human. So I know I'll wrap up because I can see many of you guys are getting tired. But if we can imagine, say, the Quran, some people believe that the Quran is the physical incarnation of God's word. Do some people believe it? Was it the Mu'tazila? Yeah, there was a group of early Muslims who believed that the Quran was the physical incarnation of God's word. So you had the physical pages of the book, and you had the eternal kind of essence of God's word onto that book. Essentially, the Christian view is Jesus was the walking Quran. He was the incarnated word of God, and so what I'm trying to say is that I believe, this is my personal opinion, that the verses in the Quran are banning specific forms of Trinity that existed at the time, because we know there was many forms of Trinity, including taking the mother, including it into the deity, begotten a son, saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became a human, and all these things which doesn't quite fit in with the Orthodox view of Trinity. And lastly, Jesus mentioned in the Talmud in a very negative way, but to be objective I have to say it. He was described as a sorcerer, a black magician, as a son that turned out badly. He was executed on a stake. He was the son of Mary, and his mother Mary was a fornicator who had slept with a Roman guard called Pandetta, and he was essentially a bastard child born of fornication. Now, this is a Talmud which obviously came post-Christianity, so in my mind it is a bit reactionary, but still, objectively, this is what the Jews that did not accept Jesus go on to write. And they said he was accused of practicing witchcraft for enticing and leading Israel astray, and they hung him on the eve of the Passover. And they call him Yeshu, and they actually say, may his name be blotted out forever. So you know how we say, Isa alaihi wasalam, they say Yeshu, may his name be blotted out. Okay? And that's essentially the end of the talk. I just wanted to show you my next talk, just so you can see what you're in for. So my other talks will be explaining more about the councils of Nicaea, explaining more about the heresies that happened at the time. We have Arianism, we have Jehovah's Witness, how those things came out, all the councils, Nestorius, we'll talk about early church figures, the monophysite, diaphysite, miaphysite issues. I'll talk a little bit about the spirituality of Orthodox, so prayer, fasting, marriage, and then my other talk will be on Coptic iconography, and that is something that you guys I know will like. This one was a bit literary, and I can see you guys are all tired, but I can promise you the other one will be all pictures, as you can see. It's all pictures, and that's something you like, so stick around for it. Do
you have to show us the video of the monk one?
Oh yeah, I have other talks about the interactions between Peter the monk and the prophet, peace be upon him, and kind of like the Byzantine versus Islamic point of view from that. So a lot of you, if the class gives me the chance, I have plenty of talks ready if you guys are willing to be.
Wow.
Very